Welcome, science friends, to anaerobic respiration, fermentation. So fermentation is the solution to a problem. So as we just learned in glycolysis, we turned NAD plus into NADH. But how are we supposed to get those NAD pluses back so we can continue that process? Well, fermentation is the solution to that problem. So for all of those anaerobic respirating organisms like bacteria, they can't just move on to aerobic respiration with oxygen because they don't need all of that ATP. They want to keep going in this anaerobic environment or no oxygen environment. So fermentation is the releasing of energy in the absence of oxygen. It is anaerobic. There's no oxygen there. And this happens in the cytoplasm. During fermentation, the cells take that NADH that was created during glycolysis and they swap it out. They take off that hydrogen to turn it back into NAD plus so that it can loop back into glycolysis to make that ATP. So here's one of the few diagrams. We have glucose turning into our ATP and NAD plus and our two molecules of pyruvate. Then during the fermentation process, it's using up that NADH to turn it back into NAD plus to restart the glycolysis process. There are two kinds of fermentation. There's alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation is something that we're all familiar with. We see it in a lot of yeast and other microorganisms, and it's one of the things that helps bread rise. So if you enjoy bread, you can thank alcoholic fermentation because of the yeast. During alcoholic fermentation, we take the pyruvate acid that came from our glycolysis plus the NADH that comes from glycolysis, and it's a reaction that then turns it into the products of alcohol because it's alcoholic fermentation, carbon dioxide, and the NAD plus, which we need. We need that NAD plus to go back into glycolysis to create more ATP for this organism. When yeast in the dough, if we're talking about bread, runs out of oxygen, it begins to ferment, giving off bubbles of carbon dioxide. That's what gives bread its very airy, bubbly texture on the inside. Thanks, yeast. Here's another look at just a different diagram. We take those two pyruvic acids from glycolysis. We take the NADH. We're going to use some of the energy that's locked away to make CO2, carbon dioxide, and replenish the NAD plus back into glycolysis, and the resulting molecule left over is ethanol, or a type of alcohol. Here's an interesting question for all of you who are athletes or like to work out. Why are muscles sore after a workout? Well, we can thank lactic acid fermentation for that. Lactic acid fermentation happens in all animal cells. So yes, like you and me, we're animals. We go through lactic acid fermentation sometimes. Pyruvic acid from glycolysis can be converted into lactic acid. This conversion, or changing from pyruvic acid into lactic acid, again, takes the hydrogen off the NADH, turns it into NAD plus, and that resulting acid. Lactic acid is created by unicellular organisms in things like cheese and pickles and kimchi and other tasty sort of tangy foods. And so we have to thank anaerobic respiration for all of those tasty foods that we like to enjoy. We also see it as the reason why we get sore after a workout. So when we're working out, we can only take in so much oxygen, and if we can't get enough oxygen in for aerobic respiration, our body starts to go through fermentation, lactic acid fermentation. And this is really rapid exercise. So you're running a very long time, you're lifting a lot of weights for a long time, really, really heavy exercise. There isn't enough oxygen to get us through. Lactic acid doesn't directly cause muscle burn, but it does create that sort of soreness feeling. When we go through lactic acid fermentation, ATP is made very quickly, but that causes a drop in pH. And when we go down in pH, that means it's acidic. And we feel that. When we start getting acid, it burns, which is why our muscles start to burn. So as you continue to exercise, you will tear your muscles, which is good. That's how we build up more muscle, little micro tears, but it also causes that muscle soreness. Once again, here's another diagram showing us the other fermentation lactic acid. We start out with pyruvic acid and 2 NADH, just like in alcoholic fermentation. And just like alcoholic fermentation, we get out those 2 NAD pluses, but instead of ethanol and carbon dioxide, we get lactic acid. Humans also go through fermentation, that lactic acid fermentation, and all cells contain a small amount of ready-to-go ATP, but it's only about 5 seconds worth. So after those 5 seconds, your body needs to use lactic acid fermentation, and that can last up to 90 seconds, so a little bit longer. You breathe hard to get rid of that lactic acid that's been building up in your body, and for exercise that's longer than 90 seconds, we start going into cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is much slower, but it does produce more ATP. That was fermentation. I hope it helped.